Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Advocacy Arena. And here today with me, my guest is Tom Carter. I'm so excited to have him here because he is going to share some things with us about a person that we have all been hearing about. If you listen to Advocacy Arena, you've heard of him, but not a lot of people do. And I'm so glad that I met Tom because he's someone who's very knowledgeable about this person. And Tom, I am going to give you an opportunity to say hello and tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Dee. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. And my name is Tom Carter. I've lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 40 years. I was a reporter at the Washington Times for 25 of those years. After I left journalism, I was the public relations communications guy at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. And then for 3 years after that, at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, the communications guy there as well. I was a government employee, but because of a number of things that happened at the U.S. Commission, the government agency where I was working, Leonard Leo, who was a political appointee, became my boss for 3 years. So yeah, I worked under Leonard Leo for 3 years, 2009 to 2012. Since then, I've been trying to warn reporters about who he is and what he is. He's become better known in the last couple of years, but back in 2010, 2011, he was just another one of the tens of thousands of lobbyists in DC, and
Right.
reporters didn't think he was worth much of a story. In 2016, he became what is now known as the Trump Whisperer, the Judge Whisperer. He helped place 3 Supreme Court justices under Trump, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. But what most people don't know is he was also instrumental in placing 3 others before Trump. He helped campaign and get Clarence. Yeah, he helped campaign and get Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. And he was the Bush whisperer, getting Roberts and Alito onto the Supreme Court. So there are 9 Supreme Court justices, and Leonard Leo was instrumental in getting 6 of them on the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty scary. One guy.
Very. So, what do you think people need to know most about Leonard Leo?
Well, basically that he is a person who exists. He has been hiding behind the curtain and getting a lot of work done, like in The Wizard of Oz, for years.
That's what I envision.
And nobody knows who he is, or very few people. Like I said, more people are beginning to know who he is now. But for example, I live a couple of blocks from the Supreme Court, and when Dobbs was announced, I walk up there sometimes if there's a big case and I know there's going to be people out there. And I walked up there to see, to watch the demonstration is what it boiled down to. And there were certainly 600-800 people there, maybe 1,000 or 2 wandering around, protesting pro and con Dobbs, and obviously a number of journalists. A number of reporters came up to me and asked me for a comment because I had on an anti-Trump T-shirt. It said it has a picture of Trump and says "Pinche pendejo." And can you swear on this podcast?
Yeah, sure. Be yourself, your authentic
Okay,
self.
okay. Pinche pendejo in Spanish means fucking asshole.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, several reporters came up to me and asked me, for a comment. And I would say, before I would comment, sure, I'm happy to comment. Who do you work for? And then I would say, have you ever heard of Leonard Leo? And not one reporter who was reporting on the Dobbs announcement that day had ever heard of Leonard Leo.
You've got to
Um,
be kidding me.
I am not kidding you. I went up
Wow.
again for the MIFID Prestone announcement. This was fairly recently. At that time, maybe a third of the reporters had heard of Leo, but two-thirds had not. He's basically hidden behind a curtain, puppet master kind of thing, doing work all over Washington. So not only is he directly responsible for six different Supreme Court justices being on the 6-3 Supreme Court. He's also instrumental in Project 2025.
Mm,
I'm sure you've heard of that. I don't know about
yes.
your listeners, but it is a 900-page blueprint for the next Republican Trump presidency if he's elected in November. 900 pages of what they plan to do. And there's about 100 different groups involved. The Heritage Foundation is number one, but Leonard is
Hmm.
involved in staffing and close relationships and funding 50 of those 100 groups. He's
Wow.
also involved in several of his, what I would call Leo lieutenants, are
Hmm.
directly involved with the Heritage Foundation Project 2025. Kevin Roberts, who runs the Heritage Foundation, and another guy named Roger Severino
Right.
are directly involved in Project 2025. And so he's got his fingers in a lot of pies, put it that way.
Yes. And you've covered several of the questions that I was going to ask you in your response there. So I really do appreciate that. So what, you know, it's obvious to me, but maybe others who are listening may not understand. So what do you see as the danger that he poses, the impact that he is having and the potential to have in this country?
Well, the potential is already happening. I mean,
Hmm.
if you look at the Supreme Court findings of the last few years on guns, on climate change, on federal regulation, on women's health, abortion,
Right.
contraception, that sort of thing, they are all very much opposed um, to basically the freedoms that we have enjoyed the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years and more. In effect, the Supreme Court is trying to, some people have said, erase the 20th century. And
Hmm.
what that boils down to is going back to um, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the New Deal. The New Deal gave us Social Security,
Hmm.
the right for unions for people to join unions, a whole bunch
Hmm.
of social safety net issues that we take for granted today.
Right.
And they're rolling the FDR New Deal back. They're also LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson gave us the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. They're trying and succeeding in rolling those things back as well. And this argument has been going on for hundreds of years in the United States, going back to the late 1800s, basically when rich oligarchs could do anything they want, building the railroads and the mines and all of the things that they did with zero federal regulation.
Right.
And and what FDR put into the very first federal government regulation came into being over the railroads back in the late 1800s. And it's been, the federal reach, put it that way, has grown in the last 120 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the the oligarchs, the rich um, uh,
They don't
billionaires,
like that.
they don't like that. They don't like the taxes that they have to
Mm-hmm.
pay, and they don't like the federal regulation. So in today's world that we're living in now, the oligarchs, the oil billionaires, the Kochs, the Scaife, the Ulines, Barry Said, to name a few, are basically trying to roll back what lawyers have said, the 20th century. Go back to a time when there were no taxes and there were no regulations. But they have found their ideas extremely unpopular. Um, the Koch brothers, one of them ran as a libertarian vice
Right.
presidential candidate in the late 1970s or early 1980s. I'd have to go look it up.
It,
And
it
he
was
got
the yeah, it was the early I think it was the early 80s. I used to
early
know
80s,
that day.
1980. And
Mm-hmm.
he got 1.6% of the popular vote. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and that platform that he ran on is basically Project 2025 today. It's
Exactly. Oh,
it
I love you, Tom. I love you. I've been telling the folks the story of Project 2025 and trying to introduce them to, some of the folks. So I love that, you say that because I talk about the Cokes a lot. I have some, kind of personal connections to them.
Well, anybody interested in the Kochs needs to read Jane Mayer's Dark Money. That is that
Absolutely.
that lays out, but it's a three part I don't know, fork, prong, whatever you want to call it. Basically,
Hmm.
it's the rich
Hmm.
billionaires who
Hmm.
want no taxes and no
Hmm.
regulation. They have no support.
Hmm.
Also in the early 1980s, late 1970s, a guy named Paul Weyrich
Right.
was look with no constituency, one of the a very hard right, far right Catholic who has said, the more people vote, the more we lose. We don't want people to
Exactly.
vote.
Hmm.
He was looking, he basically didn't have a large population following his ideas as well, very far right Catholics. So he went to Jerry Falwell and said, "Let's make a deal. Let's get together and work together." What they got together over abortion, but that's
Hmm.
not what got them together. What got them together was a Supreme Court finding called Bob Jones. Bob Jones was Bob Jones University, a Christian university that
Hmm.
was opposed interracial dating, interracial marriage, because the Bible told them so. Now, the Supreme Court found that Bob Jones University was more than welcome to have its religious freedom and practice its basically racist perspective, teach its
Segregationist.
right
Yeah.
from the Bible.
Hmm.
But they were not, if they were going to do that, they were not allowed to have federal subsidies and they were going to
Hmm.
lose their tax exempt status. That sent shockwaves through the Christian private school world. Because if the
Hmm.
Supreme Court could take away their tax exemption, their subsidies, they could take them away from them as well. Now, the Christian private school world came about because of an early 1950s Supreme Court finding, Brown
I
v.
know where you're
Education,
going.
that
Hmm.
said, little black children get to go to school with little white children. Separation is separate is not equal. And so a bunch of white people said,
Lost their
okay,
mind.
they lost their minds. I mean, Virginia public schools in some counties were closed literally for months, if not years,
Hmm.
opposing this Supreme Court finding.
I did an
Um,
episode about that during Black History Month.
exactly. Yeah, it's really, and so Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich, moving up to the late 1970s, well, we can't sell racism. That's really what
Mhm,
we're concerned about, is them
mhm,
taking away our tax exemption from our Christian schools. But what can we sell? What can we sell? What can we sell? How about abortion? That's where the entire anti-abortion movement came about. The Catholics already had an anti-abortion infrastructure. But at that time, there was no, there was not much, put it that way, um, opposition in the Protestant Christian world to abortion. There was no organization around it. But with the Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich, dark room deal, as it were, then the billionaires had somebody to fund. But
mhm.
if you go move it on up, am I talking too much?
No, no, no. I love it because this is why I wanted you to be a guest on here because I talk about dark money all the time. Another person, I'm glad that you mentioned Jane Meyer. Another person that I mentioned is Ann Nelson because, I know what you were
And Nelson
describing
has
there
done,
were the work of the Council for National Policy. And so I want
yes.
people to know more about that organization and the people who founded, who are still operating it. And that's why Leonard Leo was someone that I wanted to highlight because you have such great knowledge about him.
Well, what happened? Ann Nelson's book, Shadow Network, is brilliant, and it's all
Hmm.
about how the Council on National Policy came about. There's a new documentary based on her book, which the
Bad
name of
faith,
which is
bad
Bad
faith.
Faith. Yes,
They just
Beth is,
followed me
and
on Twitter today because I really
yeah.
I've given the community an assignment, everyone, to watch it and tell me what they
Well,
think. Excellent.
the other part of that, the other part of the Council of National Policy is what Catherine Stewart has written about in a book called Power Worshippers. They
Hmm.
are, it's like the history and the rise of Christian nationalism is what it boils down to evangelical Christian nationalism. But and here's the interesting part, and here's where Leonard Leo comes in. He's a member of the Council of National Policy, as is Jenny Thomas and Mike
Hmm.
Flynn and a
The
bunch of other
Cokes,
persons.
yes. Hmm.
But what Leonard Leo did that the uh, oil billionaires who were tied in with the Birchers and so forth didn't have, and what the Council on National Policy and what this religious coalition, anti-abortion religious coalition, didn't have was a structure and infrastructure in Washington, D.C. to
Hmm.
actually get stuff done. So that's where Leonard Leo comes in. He has stacked and Leonard realized 30 years ago that we can't win at the ballot box. The only
Right.
way we can win is if we stack the courts. And that's why he stacked the Supreme Court with
Hmm.
far right extremist Catholics. Leonard is a
Yeah.
far right extremist Catholic. And while there's a number of things
Is
that,
that Opus Deus?
well, Opus Dei is a far right extremist Catholic organization, and Leonard Leo says he's not a member. However, he donates tens of thousands of dollars to it. His daughter's picture sits over the front desk, a large portrait of her being embraced by Jesus. She passed away a number of years ago,
Hmm.
and there is and people can pray to her for miracles and so on and so forth. He
Hmm.
sends his kids to an Opus Dei high school called the Heights here in Washington, D.C. I mean, he says he's not a member, but that's like saying Iran isn't supplying terrorist groups with missiles or something.
Right, like sure,
He
Jan.
yeah, he's absolutely a funder and a fellow traveler of Opus Dei. And also Kevin Roberts, who is
Yes.
at part of the head of the Heritage Foundation in part of 2025. He is also what some people might call Opus Dei adjacent. He's
Okay.
very hard right extremist Catholic, as is Roger Severino, who wrote the entire section on women's health and removing, making abortion illegal, making contraception illegal, anti-GLBTQ stuff. He's also Opus Dei adjacent, put it that way.
Yeah. So why
Um,
don't you think that like we are all like part of the reason I have you on, and I know a lot of other reporters and people are now focusing on them. Why don't you think people focused on them like 10 or 15 years ago?
That's a very good question, and I wish someone would ask David Korn at Mother Jones, who I briefed deeply, Robert Draper at the New York Times, who I gave a long briefing to on Leonard Leo, Ian Millhauser. He was at Think Progress. He's now at Vox. Long briefing. Jack Jenkins, who is at Religion News Service. Carl Hulse, also at the New York Times. That I think this stuff was not a secret.
Right.
Carl Hulse at the New York Times at a public gathering for his book on Kavanaugh spoke about DC's Catholic mafia. This is known. People know about DC's Catholic mafia, but they're afraid to write about it. And I think because they're afraid to be called religious bigots. A
Ah.
few, the Sarah Posner, who has written a lot about the Christian nationalists and evangelicals, has written a book, or not a book, but an article called The Catholic Playbook. And it's all about how if you say anything about Catholics, whether it be Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh or anybody like that, there's an entire structure of people who will come after you hard and say you're a bigot. Heidi Hezbollah, if that's how you say her last name,
Yeah.
at Politico, has written about Leonard Leo a little bit. Actually, no,
Hmm.
more than most.
Right.
And she wrote an article a few months ago about how the DC Attorney General is investigating Leonard Leo.
Hmm.
And and she talked a little bit about natural law versus the laws which is a very Catholic concept of Thomas Aquinas.
Hmm.
And Leonard Leo has spoken about it, versus our laws being given to us by the Constitution and so on and so forth. And you wouldn't believe it. The far right Catholic world went crazy. A guy named Bishop Barron, who has a website, a podcast called Word on Fire or something to that effect.
Hmm.
A bunch of people came after her. And said, she's a bigot. She doesn't know what she's talking about, blah, blah, blah. The real issue was not whether she's a bigot or not. She's not, by the way. If you read her
Hmm.
stories, there's nothing bigoted in them at all. The real issue was she exposed Leonard Leo, and the DC Attorney General is coming after her, is coming after Leo. They're
Hmm.
investigating him. That's the
Good.
issue. That's the issue. I mean, it's even up here on Capitol Hill. In my neighborhood, there are signs everywhere. Recall Allen. I'm in Zone 6.
Hmm.
And Zone 6 is our representative in the DC Council is a very popular councilman. But
Hmm.
he said some things in favor of Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. And so there is a recall effort.
Wow.
Yeah, and Leonard and Carrie Severino, who is the wife of Roger Severino, who runs Leonard Leo's Judicial Crisis Network,
Hmm.
has tweeted about this and how he doesn't care about the guy's name is Brian Schwab. He doesn't care about crime in DC. All he cares about is a politically motivated investigation of basically her mentor and to some degree boss, Leonard Leo.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's fascinating to watch this, and
And
anyway,
scary, because the more I learn about them, and the scarier, it becomes. But I feel like that the more of a reason to know and understand what they are doing, because I think Ann Nelson kind of opened my eyes to um, folks like that, because of the system, the infrastructure is where the power lies, and that Paul Wyrick, and how he, kind of just brought them all together there. And I find it interesting that you did mention like this Project 2025, wanting to basically strip away the 20th century. And some of I'm kind of a history nerd. Big fan of Heather Cox Richardson, and read and watch her, and started learning about really what I consider an earlier iteration of Project 2025, and that was the Conservative Manifesto, which the Bircher
right,
Society
right.
created. So these guys have been around for a really, really long time, and they just kind of built their infrastructure to, it just keeps getting bigger and better, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I think that one thing, I mean, if you're a history nerd, then I urge you to go Google Catholic integralism. Catholic
Okay.
integralism is a philosophy that's been around for 100, 200 years. And
Mm-hmm.
basically what the primary aspect of it is there is no separation of church and state. You're on this planet to save your soul. That's you were
Mm-hmm.
born here and you have to be saved. And therefore, everything, including the state, must be geared towards saving your soul. And the only way the state can help you save your soul is by following the teachings of the Catholic Church. And
So
so,
Christian nationalism.
well, it's Christian nationalism, but it's definitely with the Catholic flavor. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I mean integralists and Opus Dei, for example, were very, very involved with Franco's Spain,
Mm-hmm.
Franco's fascist Spain. And you
Mm-hmm.
talked about going back to the Birchers. William Buckley, Pat Buchanan from those days, all of these
Mm-hmm.
guys are big admirers
Mm-hmm.
of Franco's Spain because he fought communism and he established a Catholic state. One of
Mm-hmm.
the philosophers that integralists admire and they draw on frequently is a guy named Carl Schmitt, who was the primary legal authority and philosopher for the Nazi state.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you just go, "Are you kidding me?" So the you Project 2025 with the Supreme Court, with the Leo Supreme Court to rubber stamp it, is the roadmap for a Catholic Christo-fascist state.
And
You
there
you
we
said
go. We are running out of time, Tom. I would love to talk to you again. You have shared so much, and then made me curious about so many other things. I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of tell folks where they can find you, and leave them with something to, pearl of wisdom, or something to research before we close out. And
Well, I'm on Twitter. I think I'm shadow banned and I've been blocked from following anybody. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of Twitter jail I'm in, but I'm there. You can find me, Tom Carter. I think it's TH Carter 5 is
and I'll
my
put this
my,
information when I
my
post the
handle.
interview.
I think a book that doesn't get enough. I mentioned Jane Mayer's book, Catherine Stewart, and Nelson, But Nancy McLean's book, you said you're a history buff, she talks about how libertarian ideas came to George Mason University and have then since been disseminated through Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
Fascinating book on how John C. Calhoun's states' rights libertarian ideology was picked up by a guy named James Buchanan. The Koch
Mm,
brothers fell in love with it, basically installed this guy at George Mason University. They've also spent millions and millions of dollars through Leonard Leo taking over George Mason Law School. It's now the Antonin Scalia Law School. And a lot of times when you hear, for example, Eileen Cannon went on a junket sponsored by the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo. It's through the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason. They're also doing the same thing at Catholic University. A guy named Tim Bush and the
hmm.
Napa Institute, and this is all very integralism Catholic. Bought
Okay.
the naming rights for Catholic universities, business schools. Now the Bush
Wow. You have
Business
given
School.
me some homework, Tom.
Well, it's complicated. It's a strange web. You have to give Leo Leonard credit. He's created an astonishing network of people,
Hmm.
and now they're buying millions and millions of dollars of property up here in Capitol Hill. A guy, Thomas Edsall in the New York Times, wrote about this fairly recently about heritage, the family, the C Street stuff, and
Yes.
Steve Bannon all buying property on Capitol Hill, which also ties into somehow with Leo folks opposing our C Street representation, or not our C Street, but our Zone 6 representation. So I mean,
Okay.
it's a very layered and complex operation. Like Leo's like a chess master playing on 3 or 4 different boards, and it doesn't
Right.
matter what your issue is, whether it's women's health and abortion, or whether it's climate change, or whether it's guns, what CRT in schools. No matter what issue you are interested in, pretty good chance Project 2025 is opposed to your position, and Leonard Leo has a Supreme Court that's going to rubber stamp it and make it the law of the land.
Amen to that. I think that's a very good note for us to end on. And I would like to extend an invitation for you to come back for part 2. I feel like we just scratched the surface, and I love having someone who is as knowledgeable as you to talk about a subject that I have just become intrigued with, and I'm trying to share that information with others.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to come back. I'm always happy to try to spread the word regarding Leonard Leo and the Project 2025.
All right. Well, folks, you heard it here. You got a little smarter. I know you did today about Leonard Leo, and I can't wait to dig into some of the books and the reporters that Tom suggested we follow and learn a little bit more. The more we know, okay? Knowledge is power. Thanks again, Tom. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Talk soon.
All right. Bye.